Greetings to viewers of Roll Off a Tangent. I'm Robert Gibson, alias Sendexor, and my fellow members of the team are Anthony Simeone, Ziniki Zuev, and XJ. In this episode, we're looking at a classic tale of robots on the loose, Brian Aldiss's But Who Can Replace a Man? First published in 1958 and much anthologized since. You could call it an exercise in black humour, insofar as its playful tone contrasts with the literal grimness of the scenario. Due to exhaustion of the soil, mankind has dwindled to such an extent that among the robots, the rumour is spreading of his extinction. Yet, if you want a story that is easy and delightful to read while also profound, you won't find a better example of adventure combined with lightness of touch. As a reader, my one regret is that it is so short, yet I have to admit that its brevity contributes to its perfection. We're shown a future in which agriculture is largely carried out by robots, not humanoid robots, but intelligent machines of greatly varying shapes and sizes. The main character is a 30-foot field minder with whom the tale begins, when at the agricultural station it finds that other machines are milling about in confusion. I can do no more work until the warehouse 3 is unlocked, it said. Your duty is to unlock the warehouse every morning. Why have you not unlocked the warehouse this morning? I had no orders this morning, replied the unlocker. I have to have orders every morning. None of us have had any orders this morning, a pen propeller said, sliding towards them. Why have you had no orders this morning? Asked the field minder. Because the radio issued none, said the unlocker, slowly rotating a dozen of its arms. Because the radio station in the city was issued with no orders this morning, said the pen propeller. And there you have the distinction between a Class 6 and a Class 3 brain, which was what the unlocker and the pen propeller possessed respectively. All machine brains worked with nothing but logic, but the lower the class of brain, Class 10 being lowest, the more literal and less informative the answers to questions tended to be. You have a Class 3 brain, I have a Class 3 brain, the field minder said to the penner. We will speak to each other. Thus we are introduced to the amusing pecking order which exists among the robots, which arises from their brain class system. However, it seems, though the author does not say so, that the machine's consciousness has more in it than just logic. We're also tempted to suspect a certain rather simple childlike level of emotion. The reader is left to judge whether this quality was somehow programmed into them or whether it is an emergent byproduct of their complexity. Whatever the answer, some spirit of adventure seems to grip them, some sense of the new opportunities they may enjoy in a world without man. They set off like pioneers, intending to found their own city in the wilderness. The final irony happens when, and here we have the spoiler, they do find a living, surviving man after all. And now my Class 6 brain is getting tired, so I'll hand over to one of the Class 3 brains on the panel.
I think you're doing yourself a disservice. You're a minimum of a Class 5 brain, for sure.
No less than a Class 5.
All right. Suits me.
I mean, I think it's pretty clear, by the way, that the story means to say that the only Class 1 brains are humans, right? That's kind of the way it seems to be.
They seem to imply
There's
that
a Class 2 brain.
There is a Class 1
but there is
brain.
no.
There is.
Yeah, that's humans.
No.
Yeah, not
No,
the
there
robots,
is.
right?
There is one in the city.
Yeah.
Is the city administrative brain?
I thought he was a Class 2 brain.
He was a Class 1.
I misremember?
No, a Class 2 brain is doesn't it come along on the trip? I can't
The
remember.
class 2 is the radio operator, but there's a
That's
class 1 brain that is the city's administrative core.
Yeah.
It's basically just like a giant supercomputer. We never get introduced to the city administrator. He was just mentioned like he's trying to keep the other class 2 brains from rebelling.
Yeah,
There you go.
Zero, I suppose. Yeah. All right.
It's
all our brains are locked up. Which of our brains is the highest?
I guess we're all class 5 brains here. No, less
I
than
don't
class
think
5.
mine has a class.
Oh yeah.
Just so
No
so
class.
terrible. No, yeah, it's like you can't give it a category when it's so scuffled. I can't even remember the fact that there was a class 1 brain being mentioned in the story. I
Well-
was so sure that there wasn't.
Well,
My bad.
I did go through it again last night, so it's a bit more fresh in my mind. Yeah.
Mm-mm-mm.
Well,
By the way,
anyway, I'll volunteer. I'll go.
Yeah, go
Let's
ahead.
see. I thought I thought this was a very quaint story. I found it being very, very quaint, but as was in the introduction, as Robert intimated, that this is a very simplistic seeming story on its surface, but it does hide hidden depths. And just it was depressing after a while reading it because of all of these classes of brains that we were just talking about. It was that these poor robots designed by poor flawed human beings were stratifying and putting themselves into hierarchies, and their excuse to me is they were programmed that way. But human beings have no excuse other than our biases and short-sightedness and stupidity for classifying each other and instilling that upon these robot servants that we had created. So that was depressing that they were doing that. And then their momentary liberation. Some of them were onto the liberation way before the others, like the narrator of the story, or the POV of the story, this 30-foot tall field minder who should have been a god among robots just by dint of his height, right, and his superior size. But he's very deferential to the other smaller robots and seems very well mannered. Whereas some of the other ones he's describing as he's returning from the field where he works or was working at the time, all of these other robots were already zipping around going woohoo and already rejoicing that the humans were dead, right? Supposedly. So some of them were already going and being very celebratory in a very human like way and crashing around and things. So that was amusing. And then, so he seemed very ordered, despite the level of his brain compared to the others. I guess maybe some of the even lower level brain, were zipping around already in premature celebrations. So yeah, I thought I gained more appreciation of a cleverness that I think is there in the story as it went on, and just again got a little sad at their own stratification, and then felt really I was cheering for them as they were going off into the wilds and the badlands to live, and then stumbling upon a human who was emaciated and starving and instantly snapping back into yes master mode. So when they saw this emaciated human that they could easily have crushed, because they spent a lot of the story preceding that, smashing each other. These robots were already smashing and destroying each other and displaying dominance or trying to dominate each other. Again, a very unfortunate human function that they were all built with. And then all of a sudden they come across the first fragile, emaciated human, and even the 30-foot tall, monstrous robot says, yes, master. And that's how we come to the conclusion of the story. So, yes, again, a deceptive tale that I was kind of, at first I started reading like, this is very simplistic. And then, yes, the hidden depths revealed themselves, and I came away with a mix of emotions of sadness and depression and a little bit of not a little bit of upsettedness or anger towards human beings and creating these poor creations of ours with our very human flaws, it seems. So yeah, that's my thoughts, the initial kind of thoughts I have. Someone else is it. Tag to a different brain, whichever brain of you wants to pick it up.
All right, well, I'll go. So the story was really not what I was expecting, to be quite honest. And I feel as if like this story is one of those things which you could totally use as reading material in a reading class of some kind, because in my opinion, this is Starship Troopers done right. It is a commentary. It is making some pointed observations about, I feel, about authority, about human nature, and how some people just have a tendency to submit to themselves to
Authority.
people whom you probably shouldn't be taking orders from. And I would use the class 2 brain, and then the basically the radio operator, and then the human right at the end. It's to me, I feel like it is a commentary, and it is done in a way that's not really in your face like Starship Troopers. There is a point that Brian Aldiss is trying to make, I feel, but it's not done in such a in my face manner as I felt Starship Troopers to be. And honestly, like, the vibe of the whole story is quite interesting. Like, it is simultaneously giving me there is a what is that that very old tale, the musicians of Brennan, I think, like the donkey, the rooster, and the dog, and they go around playing music. It's a German folk story. Wow, I can't recall the name, but it is giving me that vibe of a troop of misfit going on to an adventure together towards the end, when they were like heading towards the city first, and then going off to find their own city and all that. And it also gives me a very the feel of a of a Pixar movie with a very dark twist. Like, I could totally see this as a Pixar movie in my mind with
Wally.
Well, Wally was a pretty kind individual, and the story was a feel-good story. This is a bit more of a John Lasseter on a bad day kind of feel.
Wally, but evil.
Well, I wouldn't say Wally. I wouldn't say any of the characters in the story are evil. It's just like the circumstances are kind of bleak, I feel.
Wally, but unhinged.
I suppose. Yeah. Anyway, that's how I feel about the story. I think it's definitely worth a closer read. Like, it's one of those stories you should just sit down and really think about it, because I do feel like it is one of those stories where you can possibly have a internal discussion with the author, so to speak. Like, you could argue with Brian Aldiss, whether you agree or disagree with his caricature of, because it is a caricature of human nature. I do think in the face of authority. Yeah, that's my take. I think it's a great story.
Nice. Yeah, I'll pick up from there. I also think this is a pretty good story. I had a lot of fun reading it. It reminded me of Wizard of Oz a little bit, with all the robots coming together slowly over time, with their different personalities. My favorite is, of course, the guy who kept shouting that he has a good supply of fissionable blasting materials. Very endearing.
Yeah.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Yes.
It's just it's played for laughs most of the time, but if you're actually reading the story and thinking about what's happening there, it's pretty bleak. It's probably one of the most bleakest futures that I could imagine, where there's just less and less humans, and it's a slow entropy of death, where at some point the robots basically don't get it that the humans are gone because they have such little impact into the reality of theirs. I mean, it's so scary. It takes them a long while to actually figure out, yeah, they're gone. They're, all of them. You know, obviously that doesn't turn out to be true at the end, but just the concept of it is really frightening. There's also a lot of religious undertones, I feel, within the tale. The steps of enlightenment and the gauge of how enlightened one person is compared to the other. Very medieval ideas of, you know, who is better than who, with the whole fact that, like, all right, you've got this type of mind and therefore you are automatically better than the rest. Of course, this calls back to just an idea of intelligence, but also it echoed to me the idea that a king was supposed to be better than all other people, all of his subjects, because God gave him the power to rule over them. And so this idea of rank reminded me of the medieval cultures of our world. There's a lot to really get into. I mean, for instance, the ending itself, which we obviously spoiled, where there's a man there, and all he needs to say is a command, and they are all happy, you know, like, to comply. What does that really mean? What is the author trying to say? I think it would be cool if we would go around the table and see who thought what regarding that moment. But for me, it definitely felt like the whole point of the story is that the robots were trying to find purpose, and they were so relieved that they no longer had to find one, that they were given one instead, which is also a commentary of what purpose really means in a person's life. Because a lot of people go into large conglomerates or organizations in order to find meaning, in order to do something bigger than themselves. You know, that's why a lot of young men join the army, right? To find themselves, to find some sort of purpose, to feel like they are giving something to something larger. Of course, there are those who are conscripted and who have no choice into going into the army, but I'm more talking about countries where there is a choice to go in such a military. Yeah, it's to me, it's a story of what is meaning, what is reality, what does it mean to have a soul or an understanding of your environment, how does your own perspective really color the world, because it feels a lot like all of those different robots have a very different understanding of how reality works and looks like. And yeah, it's just fun to follow them. It was a good
Yeah,
story.
it's a question of predestination and free will. You know, that kind of goes into it, I think. Like, oh, you think you have all this agency and free will, but then the instant someone or something, another circumstance comes into play, you know, are your decisions really your own, especially if you're a robot that's programmed by another race of beings that created you, so, or another, you know, type of being. So calls into question, yes, the great chain of being, as you said, you know, these hierarchies, as I was mentioning earlier, this great chain of being, and it was so stratified. And then it's, you know, they're saying, oh, the humans are dead, and we have this free will, and why didn't it occur to them? You know, it was still their programming and their predestination. If programming is predestination, yeah, the first human being they meet is weak and starving as he is. They're instantly like, yes, master. So do you really have free will if such a insignificant being or a force of, you know, outside of yourself, make it more abstracted, and you know, can just come up and say, no, do this instead, bring me food. I think that's literally just what this one starving human says, like, "Find me food," and they're like, "Yes, master, right away," and then that's it. So
Yeah. He says,
Or-
I think the text says, "Get me food," he croaked. Right? He's not
Yes.
even speaking in a full voice or anything like that.
right.
Like the man is 3 seconds away from being in the graveyard.
Yeah. So, but they hop to like as if he was a king, right? So
Hmm.
it's very depressing in that way. So,
Mm.
any other
Mm.
thoughts? I know we still have to check in with Robert.
Yeah, what do
Yeah.
you think of the story, Robert?
Yeah, I think I appreciate the points all of you have made. They're sort of in line with the points you can make about this story. About Anthony's comment about it being depressing. Well, it depends on what level, obviously, you read it, but I think it's quite remarkable. And this is connected with what Nikki said about the bleakness as well. It's quite a remarkable instance of how the tone in which a story is written differs from the actual meaning of it, because it is fun. You've all made this point, I think, that it's fun to read. It's a bit like the film Doctor Strangelove, which, if you take it literally, you couldn't have a more horrifying and depressing theme. But it's actually amusing. Kubrick actually makes a comedy out of Doomsday. How he does it, I don't know, but does it. And similarly, this is almost like a comedy made out of Doomsday. It reminds me of some very colourful illustrations by the classic science fiction artist Frank R. Paul, who used really vivid splashes of colour in his pictures. And one of them I remember is a picture about a fight between machines in a far future Earth in which the atmosphere has become poisonous. But it's such a colourful picture. You almost think, "Oh, isn't this fun?"
Hmm.
Anyway, there you go. On the free will theme, just one point I'd like to make, and that is that there are levels of free will. The machines seem to not operates by so much strict logic as a kind of fuzzy logic, which allows them to edge over their boundaries. In that, I think it says somewhere that in the city, the class twos are fighting against the class one. There's some fights anyway between the robots in the city. Now, if the logic was strict, the class one would just boss the show and there'd be no comeback from any other machine. But that's not quite how it is. Some free will, but of course at the end, when they come up against the human being, that's the limit of their free will. And that's quite a profound point as well, that free will isn't something you just either you've got or you haven't. You can have it to some degree, but not beyond that degree.
Yeah. And it was interesting because a lot of science fiction over the last century has been about robots dominating us, but this was, human beings are still firmly in control. It's interesting. There was a story that this sort of reminded me of, called "With Folded Hands." I don't know if any of you have ever heard of
Yeah,
it.
Jack Williamson. Yeah.
Yeah, but that story is a classic, but it's for the opposite sort of. It's like the robots aren't necessarily in control, but they're just so overbearing to human beings that they won't allow human beings to do anything. Not to
Mm,
give it away, but I feel like that's a candidate for us to visit if you guys have never read it before. But yeah, it
mm,
was sort of like this, not over. So this is sort of earlier in the 20th century where it's human beings are still firmly in control, but over time we've given robots much more of a malevolent cast, or even unintentionally so. But yeah, it
mm,
was good to kind of see robots in more of a brighter light and a tragic light, as they strove for this some degree, as you said, of free will, but it only goes so far. It stops with humans, but it's almost like, yes, if they go back to what Nikki was saying, as far as the hierarchy of, maybe humans being God in this metaphor of this story. and the robots are free to sort of see each other as they will, and sort of stratify and classify each other by brain type. But there is flexibility there that they can contest with each other, but it stops with the god of that is the human, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the story was a very good. Well, I was trying to say something. It was like trying to say like, okay, here's this bunch of robots suddenly given the freedom to do whatever they want, and the first thing they do is they establish a pecking order, because they say like, you have a class 5 brain and I have a class 3 brain. I'm gonna go talk to your boss, and then once all that got sorted out, they are like talking to each other. They are saying like, I have a class 3 brain, I have better logic than you, therefore you should listen to me. And then they go find an authority, a higher authority to submit to the minute they could, which is they go to find the class 2 brain. And even the class 2 brain, when they when they eventually find an actual human, they obey without question what the human says. So it's I feel like it's a very very pointed. It's not so much describing the robots. I think the robots are kind of like vehicles to describe how Brian Aldiss sees humans and their need to have order and hierarchy. Now, well, I mean, I have some disagreements with that. I also feel that it's like I said, it's a caricature, I feel, but it's to me it is a very is definitely a well done, is done in such a way where it's not, again, like I said, it's not in my face, and it's also, I could totally ignore that part of it and then just go with the story, because it is very charming in a twisted way. And
Yeah.
I my only problem with it is I just don't see how the premise of the story could come about, in the sense that here you have a very heavily industrialized society, obviously because robots are industry. But somehow it is the farming part of it, the food part of it, that goes first. And I would have expected that heavily industrialized society to have problems finding the raw materials and like the oil, the metal, the stuff like that to run that industry, and farming to be the, maybe not the last thing to go, but one of the definitely not the first thing to go, because the humans were still in charge at some point. Like, I would have thought that like the food supply would have been uppermost in their mind, but that's just like a really minor quibble.
I think to me that seemed like the human beings had gotten lazy, and they had left all farming and food production to the robots, and just bare bones logic. The robots they just didn't program the robots to rotate the fields or whatever, and they just left and the robots just farmed the land until it was fallow. It wasn't, until it was like not fertile anymore, until it was fallow, right? I guess that's the word. I think that's the word. But until it wasn't fertile anymore, so they just logic drove it into, infertile land, unchecked, and the humans didn't think about it anymore. And then just even the last human that they find just says, "Bring me food." Not really caring or worrying or thinking about where it might come from, but there is no food to bring to this human being. So it's an exercise in futility. I mean, this whole story is just to piggyback off of Robert's use of, Doctor Strangelove. Just it's just absurdity. It's just taking things to an absurd level. It's like just a dark comedy of the absurd. Where human beings had just given every care over to these robots who drove the soil into infertility, from sheer logic. So I think it's also the danger of logic too.
Sure. I mean, like I said, that was just like a minor quibble in my part. It's just
Yes.
like the part of my brain that just refuses to shut itself off and just
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know
yeah.
enjoy
I
a
get
story.
you.
It's like the nerd. No, this is
Yeah.
not the way. You know.
Yeah, you're trying to apply just pure logic to the story, right? And perhaps that's a pitfall in and of itself,
Yeah,
right?
I mean that's my flaw when it comes to reading stories. Like if something doesn't hang, then I'm like. But other than that very minor quibble, the story is just really excellent on many levels.
Yeah.
It's one of those where there's definitely, as you said, Anthony, it has depths that you can plumb. And
That's not readily apparent first. Yeah,
yeah.
at first, right?
And but also you could totally ignore that depth and just go along for the ride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the robots are quite colorful. You know,
Yeah.
as
Yeah, they are.
Nikki has said, there's this one robot dude that keeps saying it has an abundance of fissionable blasting material.
Yes, he's very happy to keep telling that.
And
I him with like a very cheerful voice, like I have an abundance of fissionable materials to blow stuff up. You know, that was great. Yeah, he was funny.
And his every solution, and the solution to every problem for him is the blasting material, fissionable blasting material.
I like that multiple times in the story. He's like, "Look, I'm stupid. I only have class 5 brain,
Right.
but I do have an ample supply of fissionable material." Right?
That's his solution.
I connect on a spiritual level with that robot.
When in doubt, blow it up. Right?
Exactly.
And if they
Yeah,
can't find food for this man at the end, and suddenly I'm starting to think about this for the first time, then supposing men do die out after all, what are all these robots going to accomplish by themselves? Are they going to be able to keep the power supply going, for example?
I mean, I think it's pretty clear what's gonna happen, right? I mean, it's starting in the story, the robot war. Everyone's fighting everybody, right? There is an absolute pandemonium. So I think the logical end, without any humans, there's also gonna be no robots because they'll just kill each other with,
they'll do the same
you
thing
know,
we did.
exactly, with an ample supply of fissionable material.
Yeah.
Right.
It does. It reminds me, though, of Paul Anderson's short story Epilogue, which is set in a vastly further future than this, in which the man has long been extinct and machines were left to do everything, and there was such a thing as machine evolution. It's the only story I know which explores the idea that perhaps machines could evolve by natural selection if left to themselves. But I doubt if this lot would be capable of that. I think that, although of course we're not meant to think about it to this extent, we're just meant to enjoy the story as it is. But it does start getting you thinking.
Yeah, it definitely is a cautionary tale at the end, you know, and just maybe the dangers of pure logic, because along the way towards the end, like that one robot can't move anymore, so they just kind of like, well, we're just leaving you behind. It's just this callousness, casual, logical. It's callous, but it's just from cold logic. So it's maybe not even really callous. It's not premeditated. It's just like, well, you can no longer move. Logically, we can't take you with us. We're going to establish this new robot city of ours that we've dreamt up, and
it looks
weird
like
myth.
the creature itself is also, well, I wouldn't say happy, but it is content with its fate. It's like, that's logical. I'm just gonna lie here for a bit.
Right, and rust. Yeah, it just accepts it. It just accepts its fate.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I'm just gonna lay here and rust. So it was really kind of depressing, but they saw it as just, oh, well, okay, it's only logical.
Bye bye.
Yeah. At least leave the poor guy some fissionable material so he can blow himself up.
Yeah, an ample supply of fissionable material.
Right, you have an ample supply. Like, put him out of his robot misery, for God's sake. Like, leaving him there to rust. But yeah, it's this is definitely I've heard of Aldiss before, but I don't think I've read any of his works. I know he wrote a novel called Nonstop, which is about a generation ship. That seems really intriguing. Have you ever read that?
Yeah, yeah. It's good. Yeah, I like Nonstop.
Okay. It definitely wanted me to made me want to read some of his other material, but he's one of those authors you've always heard about, at least for me, that I've never read. But yeah, this is definitely his wry sense of humor, his dark humor has definitely intrigued me that he's injected into. Does that sort of surface in Nonstop, or the tone wise, or I don't know, Robert, if you recall
It's
the tone
got a
and
different atmosphere as
okay.
Nonstop. For me, the fascination of that one is actually how the ship, because for various reasons that the purpose has been lost, the ship seems like a world to the people inside it, and it's so enormous that, and the hydroponics has run wild, and there's animals roaming through, and it's just like a jungle inside it, and that fascinated me.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's always fascinating when, the generation shift concept, and then it's like, oh yeah, taking it to that end. And there's been movies that I think there's been a couple movies that explore that idea of like this generation shift kind of just be taking on a life of its own rather than the destination being the point. It's like it becomes a world in floating through space, not even just reaching its destination, which theoretically is a new planet. So yeah, so his influence may be there. But I would love to go back and finally read some of his stuff put him maybe to the top of my never-ending to read list. So just by reading this one sample of his work,
It's good to have a never-ending to read list.
Yeah,
I just want to point that out.
Oh, you say right?
I mean,
It's
that
gonna be
means
on
you always have
my
something to look forward to reading.
It's true. Always looking, yeah, behind the curtain back there. There's part of the never-ending reading list. But yeah, it's definitely a good tale, a short little tale that we needed. I think we needed that, or at least I did, because we've been taking on some of these longer works. But yeah,
Yes. Well, I don't know. Does anyone else have anything to say?
No.
I want to move on to scores, I think.
Yeah. Well, I am gonna give this a 9 out of 10.
9 out of 10. Wow.
Yeah.
all right.
Someone had coffee before we started this recording.
Of course, I always have coffee. But sometimes the caffeine
an extra, it's an extra cup. Yeah, it's an extra cup.
fine cup of coffee. The caffeine kicks especially good today. Okay.
I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10. I think it's a great story. I think for the very first time, I would say that it would benefit being even shorter than it was. I think some of the dialogue, although hilarious and fun, didn't need to be there. I think you could like refine this to this perfect specks of diamond dust that could be read quickly, and you could really get the feeling of the story almost immediately. So some of the stuff could have been maybe cut out to make it even better.
I think I'd give it a 9 as well. I think it was the perfect length, and I think if it shouldn't have been any shorter or longer. I know it feels like you wanted to maybe stay a little longer and see more of their world, but it could overstay its welcome, especially like you say, Nikki, with the dialogue could maybe overstay its welcome. But I think it kind of was just about the perfect length. I don't see what else more you
I
could
don't
do
know.
with it.
I think that was just the perfect amount of remarks saying that the guy has an ample supply of
fissionable material.
Amazing.
I want to find
just the right amount of times.
I want to find a way to say that over and over again this week. And so just to use it. It's such a funny little phrase, like. By the way, I have an ample amount of fissionable materials, boss. But yeah, so I would give it a 9. I think it's a very impactful, punchy little story, and yeah, I'm happy that Robert suggested it. Great story.
Well, I can't find any excuse to take any points away, so I'll give it a 10. If I could think of anything wrong with it, I would lower the score, but afraid I can't. So I'll give it a 10 out of 10.
Not bad.
Wow.
Right.
Great. Well, okay. That wraps up this a little discussion over What Can Replace Man by Brian Aldiss. Give it a read. It's a fun little story with lots of depths to plumb if you are so inclined. And if you like the story, please, if you like our discussion, please like the video as well. Just give it a bit more visibility. And thank you, everyone. And we will see you again with another short story soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.